Hey, what's up, Brew Crew? Welcome back to Beer City Board Games. It is finally time. Today, I am going to be counting down my top 6 board games of 2024. We had an opportunity to play a lot of great games this year, and I personally felt like 2024 was another great year in board gaming. Some of these games will likely find their way onto my top 100 this year, so I'm kind of excited to get started and see how things shift around. Now, I don't normally do honorable mentions, but this year I felt like I was leaving off a few really great games, so I've got a couple of extra games to mention for you. First up is River Valley Glassworks. This is a very approachable game in a similar vein as Azul, and has some wonderful art and components. Then there's The Gang, which takes Texas Hold'em poker and turns it into a cooperative game, which I thought was pretty neat and has really grown on me the more I've played it. And finally, I wanted to mention Things in Rings, another game from Allplay that just missed my list, but is a fantastic game to play in social situations and has honestly created some of my favorite gaming moments of the year. Okay, now that I've got those out of the way, let's get started with the real list. All right, my number 6 is kind of a surprise to me, and that's Let's Go to Japan. This game is designed by Josh Wood and published by AEG. Honestly, when I heard that the scoring in this game takes longer than the actual gameplay, I wasn't sure I was going to end up liking it, but that actually ended up being one of the things that I love the most about the game. During the game, you'll be drawing cards into your hand and also passing cards around the table, trying to choose which cards to play to create the best travel itinerary for your trip to Japan. You're also trying to balance out your travel time between Tokyo and Kyoto so as not to get too stressed out. Then at the end of the game, as you go through and score each card, you're telling a little story about your time in Japan. And I think that's what turned it around for me from a game that I was hesitant about to a top game of the year. I love that story that you get to tell at the end of the game. The game also has really gorgeous art of places that I now very much want to visit. So that's why it's my number 6 game of 2024. Let's Go to Japan. Number 5 was also a surprise for me, so maybe 2024 was the year of surprise hits. It's a little card game that I disliked the title of and disliked the cover of, but when I played it, I immediately loved it, and that's Xylotar. This one is designed by Christopher Ray and published by Bezier Games. As I've mentioned several times before on this channel, Jen and I really love trick-taking games, and this is one of the most unique trick-takers that I've played since Cat in the Box. In Xylotar, your hand actually gets dealt to the person next to you, who's going to arrange the cards from highest to lowest and then pass them over to you face down. You'll be able to tell the color or suit of the card, and you'll know what the range of numbers is for that suit, but you don't know exactly what number is on any of the cards. You'll start off by making some guesses about the card values, but as the game goes on, you'll start to figure out more and more about your hand, assuming that you've been paying attention. It's super clever, and it's also a game in which you'll bid on the number of tricks that you'll take, but you'll do that by looking at 2 of the cards and choosing one to be your bid. So you don't have a ton of control over what your bid is either. So you do need to figure out, do you bid early so you can have time to strategize, or do you wait until you have more information about your hand? It's really tense, really fun, and really clever. I will say that this is definitely a table hog for a trick-taking game, so I wouldn't recommend this as a travel game necessarily, but if you've got some space on your table, I definitely think you should check out Xylotar. Okay, my number 4 was not a surprise to me because I actually had an opportunity to play it back in 2023, and I went right out and picked it up once it was available, and that's Seaside. This one is designed by Brian Burgoyne, and I sincerely apologize if I'm mispronouncing your last name, and published by Randolph. Now, unlike Xylotar, Seaside makes for a great travel game. Yes, the bag is a little bit larger than Xylotar's box, but it really takes up very little space when you're playing. Plus, the components are super durable with a nice canvas bag and beautiful wood tokens. This is a super simple game to teach and is quick enough to play that we almost always end up playing multiple games of it in a row. In it, you're going to be drawing double-sided tokens out of the bag and applying the effects of one of the sides. Sometimes this just means placing the tile in the center of the table and drawing another token. And sometimes it means gathering up certain tokens to place in front of you. You might get a beach where you will be able to collect seashells, sandpipers, which will let you collect isopods, or rocks, which will let you take crabs. Once the last token is drawn and its effects are applied, players will simply stack up all of their tokens and push them to the center of the table. And whoever has the tallest token stack is the winner. This game has really addicting gameplay, and like I said, we will usually play this one more than once in an evening. Plus, the components are great, and you really can take it anywhere and teach it to anybody. So that's why it is my number 4 of 2024, Seaside. All right, my numbers 1, 2, and 3 were really easy for me this year, and while I debated about the order of the top 3, they were by far the standouts for me this year. So my number 3 game of 2024 is Rock Hard 1977, published by Devere. Now, I will say that while I don't think this game is necessarily the strongest mechanically, it's probably one of the best themed games that I've played in a very long time. You start off as an amateur musician, trying to balance having a real-world job with putting in the time and effort needed to make it as a professional musician. At a certain point, you'll likely have to make a choice to leave that job and just rely on the money you make from playing gigs. And if things get desperate, you can always donate blood or start selling candy, which is exactly what you think it is. At its heart, it's a worker placement game, but this is a game where I'm very rarely thinking about the mechanisms. I'm more worried about whether I can make it to the next show and where I'm hanging out after hours. And it's no surprise that the theme in this game is so strong either, since it was designed by Jackie Fox, the bassist for the rock group The Runaways. This is a game that I think is mechanically solid and thematically brilliant. It's so much fun to play, and it leads to some hilarious moments around the table. So that's why it made my number 3 spot for 2024, Rock Hard 1977. Coming in at number 2 for the year is Forges of Ravenshire. This game is designed by Sam Stockton and published by BA Games. This game is brilliant. It sits right in the sweet spot for me in terms of weight and complexity, and honestly, it was just knocking on the door of being my number 1 of the year, and it just barely missed out. But this game combines so many of my favorite mechanisms in really cool ways. I love dice worker placement, and this game has so many things to consider when you're choosing which die to place and which to take. Not only is that die going to affect what you get when you take it, but it's also going to give you more things based on where you place it in your player board. And in the next phase of the round, it's also going to affect how you're able to convert or manipulate your resources so that you can fulfill contracts. You're also essentially building up an engine as well based on the guild tiles that you take, which will make taking certain colors of dice very lucrative. On top of all that, each player will have a unique character power, and I will often compare those powers to the player powers from Marco Polo, where it feels like everyone's ability is broken and overpowered, but because they all feel that way, it works. The production of the game is fantastic as well, with some really beautiful dice, thick cardboard tokens, and dual-layered player boards. Plus, the insert for the game works wonderfully as well. There was no doubt in my mind that Forges of Ravenshire deserved to be among my top games of the year. But now on to my number 1. Okay, if you know me and you've been watching this channel for a while, my number 1 probably will not surprise you, and it's Civolution. I've been a huge fan of Stefan Feld almost since I started gaming, and to me, I think this is one of his most brilliant designs in quite a long time. That's not to say that he hasn't put out good games recently. In fact, last year I really loved Marrakesh. But to me, this game feels like his magnum opus. It's definitely one of the heaviest games that he's designed, and it's also pretty complex with a ton of moving parts and a lot of different actions to consider. But once you get playing and start understanding how the actions work, it plays very smoothly. In this game, you're going to be rolling dice and then using combinations of 2 dice to intersect on an action space. Those actions are going to let you pursue one of what feels like dozens of different strategies. You might try to control the map by migrating and placing more tribes on the board, or maybe you'll gather up resources to buy and sell. You can also explore by flipping over tiles, which have varying point values, but may also give you a boon or a penalty for being near them. I will say that the theme of this one is a little bit out there. Apparently we are supposed to be something like deities in training, and the game is a simulation that we're running to find out who passes the training. The game definitely feels like a Civilization-themed game, although I'm not sure that the actual theme really comes out, but for this type of game, I don't really think it needs to. I do think that Pegasus did a very good job on the production of this game as well. I think the box and storage design is very well done, and I like the fact that they were able to accomplish fitting a large game like this into a manageable size box, and they did it without a bulky plastic insert. I would say that if we seem to have any crossover in gaming taste at all, then Civolution is a game that you really need to try. And that's why it is my #1 game of 2024. All right, there you have it. Those are my 6 favorite board games from 2024. Again, I think it was a fantastic year for board games, and I could have easily done a much larger list. But now, I want to know what your favorite game from 2024 was. Make sure to let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Here's to even more wonderful games in 2025, and until next time, let's get another round for the table.